Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact check and helping you if you're scared of many things. This is about the various goings on that Putin is probably behind all of them, which is like the drones in Poland, and then these bright flashing drones buzzing Danish airports and fighter jet incursions. And people saying most extraordinary things about them. I just want to help you understand how that none of this could ever possibly be anything to do with planning to attack NATO. It makes no sense whatsoever, and this is not what Putin is doing. And then I'll talk a little bit about what he might be doing. So first of all, the fighter jet incursions. So if you wanted to attack Estonia, you would not fly a fighter jet parallel to its coastline, just within its international border for 15 minutes or however long it was. That would be the most stupid way in a modern world to try to attack Estonia. Absolutely bonkers. So what happened is immediately NATO's got constant air patrols over the Baltics, and their fighter jets flew right up to there. They flew alongside them. They fly out from their airport in Lithuania, and then they flew parallel with them. And first of all, they tried on the radio, and the fighter jets didn't respond. So then the next step is that you go and intercept with them, and then they fly along parallel with them, and they waggle their wings, and then the Russian fighter jets waggle their wings back, which is a way of signaling, yes, we know you're there. And then they just kept on flying within the airspace. Now the next step after that, if it was something serious, is they'd fire warning shots. I don't think they did fire warning shots. They just flew parallel to the Russians, and they saw the Russians were not doing anything that in any way any risk to Estonia. They're not flying towards an Estonian city or anything like that. They were just buzzing Estonia just inside the airspace. So NATO just flew parallel to them until they eventually went out again. And that was that incident. Now, that is not in any way preparation for an attack. It's not planning for an attack. Because in a modern war, those fighter jets could have shot it down at any moment if they wanted to. And in a modern war, the air defences, Estonia's air defences could have shot them out of the sky. So that's not planning for an attack. Okay, agreed? So now let's look at the flashing drones. So the flashing drones, they're not very impressive. So they're big, almost like small plane-sized drones that flew over Danish airports with a lot of, they flew over them for about 4 hours, well beyond any hobbyist drone. This must have been someone who worked out that it would cost about $2 million, getting on for $2 million, probably a bit less, but more than $1 million to pay for this. So when Danish police said this has to be a state actor, what they really meant is that any even very small state could pay for it. Moldova could pay for it, or Malta, or Monaco, or Iceland. Anyone could pay for it. But also, a multimillionaire could pay for it if it's just that nobody would be so stupid as to spend so much money except a state actor on something like this. So that's all they meant. And then these are not preparing for an attack, because look at what the effect of it was. These bright flashing lights made themselves very obvious. They flew around and round and round above the airport for 4 hours, and then they flew away again, did nothing else. Then the effect of all that was that it's a criminal operation. It's nothing to suggest it's in any way military, so it's a police criminal investigation, and police and coast guards. And so they've set up air patrols in the Baltic Sea, so they will be able to spot next time, because the Coast Guard can go and apprehend as a criminal any ships that sent this. Even if it's from another country, it doesn't matter, it's still criminal. And by international law, the Coast Guards can go and put board this ship and apprehend them for doing this. So all this has done is that it's led to Denmark setting up these patrols in the Baltic Sea, which means that next time they will tell which of the various ships the drones were launched from, and then they'll be able to send the Coast Guards in, and then order the ship to come into a port to be investigated. Well, board it first, check, find the evidence, bring it into and then be subject to the Danish justice system. So how is that preparing for an attack? It isn't. If you wanted to attack Denmark with drones, you don't send big, bright, flashing drones flying about over an airport for 4 hours so that Denmark is forced to develop air defences, to develop defences against drones. Can you see? So that's not preparing for an attack. And now if you look at the Polish drones as well, and the Polish drones, they're very similar. The first drones, for some years now, Russia has been flying its German drones, which they based on the Shahed drones from Iran, and then they have a small explosive in the front, but large enough to be quite serious. If they hit, could blow up an apartment room or something like that. They're quite serious, and explosives on a small scale. And so it's been flying these. So they fly into, for instance, they fly out of Ukraine, and they go into Romania or Poland. Then they do a big loop around in Poland, and what they're counting on there is that for as long as they're in Polish or Romanian airspace, the NATO is not going to shoot them down, even though they've got no permission to be there, and NATO has every right to shoot them down, but they won't, at least until recently, until this August, until this 1st September, sorry, and they and the Ukrainians won't shoot them down because Ukraine doesn't have permission to shoot down drones in Poland or Romania either, and would be wary about the debris maybe harming citizens. So they're in a kind of safe haven, very bizarre safe haven, for as long as they're in Poland or Romania. And then they can turn around back again and go straight into Ukraine and then attack something in Ukraine coming from the direction of Poland or Romania. So Russia has had this kind of military advantage over Ukraine, and they can fly into NATO airspace and spend quite a few minutes in there and then fly back into Ukraine again. And for as long as it's in NATO airspace, it's immune from being attacked by anyone. So then Putin, for whatever reason, decides, okay, I know what I'll do. And he says, well, let's get together decoy drones and let's remove their explosive from the front, replace it by an extra fuel tank, because they found these extra fuel tanks in the ones that have landed. This gives it twice the range, or significantly increased range. Then we'll send these decoys, which are not able to blow up anything, and we'll send this on a very long path deep into Poland, so Poland is forced to shoot them down. And so that's what happened. They sent about 20 of them deep into Poland with these extra fuel tanks, little $10,000 decoy drones. And then they eventually ran out of fuel, or if they seemed to be any risk to them, then Poland shot them down. And then as a result of this, then NATO has decided that it's going to change its policy. Instead of letting these things go whirling out into kind of safe haven over NATO, it's going to shoot them down. Now, how is that preparing for an attack? How does Russia benefit from that? The answer is it's not preparing for an attack. If you're preparing for an attack, you don't force the other side to shoot down your drones. When you've had a safe haven there for 3 years, or 2 to 3 years, however long it's started doing that. All it's done is it's forced NATO to build the Eastern Sentry system to get started shooting down these drones if any go fly out of Ukrainian airspace, and Ukraine has been helping them because at the moment they can shoot them down, but with very expensive air-to-air missiles from their fighter jets, which cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to shoot down a $10,000 drone, a decoy drone, which makes no sense whatsoever. And Ukraine's much lower cost ways, and Ukraine shoots down hundreds of those a day sometimes. And so Ukraine is exporting its technology to NATO, so NATO can shoot down the Russian drones. So this also is helping NATO get much stronger at defending itself from Russian drones. And you wouldn't do that if you're planning to attack NATO with drones, would you? That would make no sense. To send feeble decoys that don't do anything deep into NATO territory to force them to start shooting your drones down. So no, so why does he do it? So that was then the question is, why does Putin do these things? And we've got very extreme examples as well, like for instance with Syria. So if you go and look at the article I link on there, and if you click through to that, then you will find examples like, for instance, with Syria. So Putin at the time, that was last winter, and he was just very, very slowly advancing in Donbass. He was losing 1,000 to 1,500, sometimes more, soldiers every day to just gain a few kilometers or a few meters or hundreds of meters of kilometers in Donbass. And meanwhile, Assad was losing his regime to rebels, many of them in open-top trucks, because there weren't any Russian soldiers there, very few Russian soldiers there. And the Russian soldiers that were in Syria, they focused on protecting their equipment, getting them out of Syria, and they didn't help Assad to save his regime. And then, as a result, Putin lost the Tartus port, which was their only way. So, for instance, right now, there's a Russian submarine in the Mediterranean, and it's in very serious trouble. It's a diesel submarine, and it can't go into the Black Sea because the Bosporus port is closed, because Turkey has closed it to anything, any military, anything, either both sides in the Ukraine war. And the only way it can get back is all the way around to the Baltic Sea. That's the only port, nearest port, because it's lost the Tartus port. And they're in quite a lot of trouble right now. And this submarine, a military Russian submarine, and would have to sail for a long, long way to the Baltic Sea to get repaired, because it's clearly got some mechanical faults, and it's been leaking. They've been spilling up. They've had a risk of fuel explosions and things. Just an example. That's just over the last couple of days. That's been going on. And it shows how much trouble basically Russia can no longer operate in the Mediterranean very easily, because it lost the Tartus port. And it's really going to be much more confined to the north, just to the coastline of Russia, and with very little presence in the Mediterranean, and no presence in the Middle East anymore to speak of. All just because Putin prioritized over all that. He prioritizes continuing to fight in Donbass. He could have just said, well, Syria is more important. Let's just have a pause in the fighting, and order our soldiers to hold the line and not keep trying to advance. And then let's send a few thousand soldiers to Syria. It wouldn't have taken that many. And let's send a few dozen of our pilots there and stop glide bombing the Ukrainians. And so, of course, this was all very good for the Syrians, and it means they got rid of Assad. So from that point of view, it's wonderful. But from Putin's point of view, as strategy, if you take his point of view, then it's completely dumb. Makes no sense at all. So this is just the way Putin is. And he's been all the way through the war. One thing after another and after another. I gave loads of examples in there. He just has... and for example, with Finland and Sweden, then he just kept bluffing and saying, look, if you join NATO, I'm going to, and indirectly threaten to nuke them if they join NATO. And of course they join NATO, because NATO is the way to go to be safe from such an aggressive neighbour. So he forced Finland and Sweden to join NATO. They could have stayed neutral for decades. They had been all along. There was no possibility of joining NATO until Putin started making all this fuss about them. So he is like a chess player who can't even see one move ahead. He's not a master strategist at all. Either that, or he may be completely dim in this particular area, like he's good at some things, but he just doesn't understand strategy at all. Or maybe it's his objective to make NATO stronger. Why, I don't know. But clearly not because he wants to attack it. His objective all through the war, all his actions have had the effect of making NATO stronger. He's pretty much forced NATO to increase its spending to 5%. Followed Trump's advice by just, whenever it considers maybe not doing that, Putin kind of says something again to try and really make sure that NATO does increase its spending. It's like he's saying to NATO, get stronger, get stronger, get stronger. Why are you so weak? Get stronger. And they're much stronger than Russia anyway, and he's continually telling them to become stronger. He just has zero next step kind of, like move ahead strategy. He just doesn't think a move ahead, or he wants NATO to be stronger for some reason. So for sure, he does not want to attack NATO. That can't be his objective. That doesn't make sense. None of what he's doing would make any sense if he was planning to attack NATO. You can be sure he isn't. So let's just go through. I think I should expand on some of these things, if there's anything I haven't said. So so I just talked about oh yes, I talked here about how you may get a false impression from Mariupol. So the earlier parts of the war, when Russia was firing bombers over parts of Ukraine and firing them over Mariupol, they fly low over Mariupol because Ukraine didn't have any air defences, and Russia did. That's the only reason they did that. If the Ukraine's allies had given them air defences in spring 2022, they would never have lost Mariupol. They'd have just been able to shoot down all the bombers, and the Russians in that situation they wouldn't have been able to keep going and take Mariupol. So this idea that you might get from the Ukraine war that the bombers should fly over Ukrainian cities, that's only because Ukraine had no air defences and it's not part of NATO. That's the only reason that happened. It's never going to happen with NATO. So that's that little bit there. And the bright flashing drones, I just go through the cost there, and they cost 2 million. Would be enough for 4 drones, and the hire of a tanker would be enough for that. A multi-millionaire. So look how strong we are. We can send flashing drones to disrupt your airports and just stop your flights. And it's just very, very silly. And then here's Admiral Radakin. I should explain who Admiral Radakin is there. He's the former chief of staff of the defense, chief of the defense staff of the. I'll probably not do a separate video about him, but when he says that Russia can't attack NATO, and to explain why. So he gave a long explanation of that. And this is what he said after he retired. He said that just before he retired, in June. And then he retired in early September, and here he is coming back to the same theme afterwards. And he said that we shouldn't be cowed by his rhetoric or his campaign of state-sponsored sabotage. Disgraceful as they are, they don't change the calculus. Indeed, the only very reason it's doing these sub-threshold attacks, is what he calls them, is because it's unwilling and unable to do anything more actual. It's not willing to do actual attacks, proper attacks. So it does these silly things because it's unwilling to do any more than that. So that's the reason he does it. Not because he's preparing to do more, but because he's never going to do more. So because he is not going to do anything more than that, you wouldn't do that if you're preparing to do more. You do that because you are unwilling to do more. And so that's what Admiral Radakin sees. He's just, and he says you shouldn't. He's wary of too great emphasis on homeland defence. They need to defend forward. In other words, protect. The UK doesn't need to defend its own territory. It needs to help the countries on the border with NATO to protect their border with Russia, protect their border with Russia. That's what he means by defend forward. And then he explains that and we demonstrate to Russia that we are stronger, that we are ready to fight, and that we will beat them. And that is the situation. And so I will talk about Radakin's speech in maybe my next video will be that, and about how he shows how vastly superior NATO is to Russia, and Russia won't even think. If it were to try to attack a NATO country, Radakin says that they used to think in terms of if Russia was to do a surprise attack and take a little bit of NATO, they would fight it back. Now they think in terms of blocking. that if Russia tries to attack NATO, they will immediately block it and they won't be able to take anything. And so NATO is very confident that they can stop Russia from taking anything. They can block him before he can get anywhere. With their huge overmatch in the sea and the air, and the way they can now very rapidly get their soldiers there on the ground. And the very much expanded Allied Defence Response Force, which is now 300,000. So, and then, yes, the Poland drone incursions, they led to the Eastern Sentry operation. I talked about that. And soon to protect all the entire NATO front line with Russia eventually will be protected by these drones. And but right now they're focusing on the drones flying out of the Ukrainian war zone, and they're starting to shoot them down, as you've heard in the news. And this just means that they're stopping them from harming this. Every country with an airspace has the right to prevent unauthorized entry into their airspace. And if the unauthorized entry is military, then the details aren't explained, but there isn't a rule against shooting down military drones flying into your airspace, and that is a normal thing that countries actually do. And there's no law that prevents that. And it's quite common for countries to say, look, if you fly things that are military into our airspace and they're unmanned, we're going to shoot them down. And then if they're manned, then you have the stage-by-stage response like NATO has. And that hasn't changed, by the way. The NATO response is the same as it's always been. There's all this thing about shoot down drones. That's not changed anything. That's always been NATO's response. If it's heading straight, if it's doing something obviously dangerous, then you shoot it down to protect your citizens. If it isn't, you just leave it to go on its own, like they did with Estonia. And you indicate to it you want it to move out of your airspace. And then if it continually refuses to respond and clearly knows you're there, but doesn't respond, then if it is heading on a dangerous course, then you shoot it down after some warning shots first. But if it's not, they just wait until it goes out again. That's standard NATO protocol at the moment. So, so none of these things are an attack in any way whatsoever. If it was meant as an attack, they wouldn't do it that way. They would hide their capabilities. And it's like, I give the example there, when Ukraine took Sudzha in Kursk Oblast in August, and Ukraine had developed a capability to fly their drones on different wavelengths from the different frequencies from the Russian drones, which gave them an advantage in the air just temporarily for a few weeks, but it was how they managed to get Sudzha. And so they didn't go flying these drones first into Russia and say, look, our drones can fly into your territory without you doing anything about us, and do that for a few weeks. Then once Russia's adapted, then go into Sudzha. That's not how you do it. They just kept it secret, and then they just used it suddenly to sprung it on Russia. And so this is not the sort of thing you do. So this makes absolutely no sense. It's not an attack. It's just, there's no more to this going on than what you see is what you get, essentially. Let's move to here. What you see is what you get. And there's he's not playing some game of chess. He's just doing this for the actual, what is actually happening right now, and not preparing for anything. And so if you get people saying, well, look, this it's surprising you get people who seem like they should know a lot, they're learned kind of people, but they military experts and so on. The most, Radican is the most. I really respect what Radican. He's very clear, straightforward, obviously extremely well informed person. So he explains this very well and properly. But you get other people, and when they're talking, you think, what planet do they live on? So they say, they talk as if these were preparations for, this was an attack. They say, and even there's one just shared in the group, someone saying, this is World War III started already. This is not a war. It's just Putin being very silly and basically just wanting to get some attention or something. Who knows why he does it? But he's just so try ask, when people talk about these things, say, do they actually explain how buzzing Danish airports is any kind of a preparation for a war, and why that would help Russia to attack NATO, or why flying drones, decoy drones, deep into Poland, why that is preparation for attack on NATO. In what way is that? In what world? In what way is that supposed to be anything to do with trying to attack NATO? They don't even talk about. They don't even think about these things, or they don't discuss them. They don't mention them. They just ignore and just kind of say, look, Russia's doing lots of stuff, so therefore, without really explaining how it's supposed to be connected. So as you can see, none of these things in any way make any sense as any kind of preparation for anything. They're just what they are, and most of them will be stopped pretty quickly. So the flashing drones buzzing Danish airports, then that's led to the coast guards and the police, and some help from the NATO as well, sending assets in the area, but not in the military operation, just to assist the civilian police and law enforcement. Then that's going to come to a stop soon. There's been lots and lots of work on shooting down drones, harmless ways, protecting airports and so on. And this has stimulated more and more work on that sort of thing. And then the Polish drones have stimulated this eastern sentry, which is going to keep countries near the Ukraine war safer from drones flying out of the space accidentally or on purpose. And then with the fighter jet incursions, then it's really pretty harmless whether Russia keeps on doing them or not. And we'll just see how that turns out. But and even if they do shoot down a Russian drone, they will only do it after Russia's done something. Like I say, they flew next to a Russian plane with both sides flipping their wings for 15 minutes, saying, look, we're here, yes, I know you're there, we're here, yes, I know you're there, for 15 minutes. And so before they shoot them down, it'd have to be something much more serious than that. Like the fighter jets suddenly veer around and go straight for the capital of Estonia, and then the NATO fighter jets would shoot warning shots at them, say, look, stop that, you mustn't go anywhere near where the people, and then the fighter jets just keep going. Eventually they did that, then they might shoot them down. And Russia would know very well it's completely in the wrong if something like that happened. And that would, there have been several incidents like that in the Cold War, where there was very much less sophisticated times back then, and there were more possibilities of getting into situations where you'd shoot down the other side's fighter jets, and that happened several times during the Cold War, and then they immediately de-escalated. And so if there ever was one side shooting down the other side, immediately de-escalate. And it's a very, very long way even from what you call it, from sporadic border conflict like you have in not even a conflict, just exchanges across the border from time to time, like they had in India and Pakistan, and a very long way away from a localized border conflict, which is a very, very long way from a large-scale war. So there's no. This is something you're always going down that path of escalation, and so we're nowhere near that. And even if they were to shoot down one fighter jet, it would be just one fighter jet shot down, and then Russia would just say, well, we'd better be a bit more careful in the future, and they'd stop flying so close, or maybe stop altogether. But there's nothing to suggest that's going to happen. It's just the same procedures in place as it's always been, and they're going to do more of this kind of ritual wiggling of wings at each other, and that's about it. That's all that's going to happen there. So anyway, so hopefully this helps some of you to be much less scared about all this, and to just take things with a pinch of salt and just realise that there's no way that Putin's going to attack NATO. So I will follow this up with the Vatican one, which is a very good one to go through, where he talks very clearly about why there's not going to be a war why Russia's never going to attack NATO. So I'll do that next.